Yeah. So I think for those of you here or outside joining now, we finished in the first lecture talking about the scientific basis of climate change. Okay? Why are we saying when you release certain gases, it'll heat the planet? Okay? So we touched upon, we covered that topic. And then the key issues which came up are our basic physics and thermodynamics tells us there is no doubt when you release gases which absorb infrared radiation, they will heat the planet. Okay? So much of the debate and argument is how large is that heating and how soon is it going to descend on us. Okay? I also showed in the first talk climate change is already happening. So it's not something 100 years from now. In the second lecture, I talked about the impacts of climate change for the glaciers, sea level, etc., etc. So the last topic is what can we do to slow down climate change, global warming? Okay, so that's the part. And how much should we be prepared to adapt? So that's the third lecture. So again, starting with this, you're going to get tired of it by the time I'm finished. What I had mentioned, you look at the sentence there, we have already dumped enough greenhouse gases to warm the planet by 2.5 degrees. The basis for that statement was what was the first lecture. Okay? So no matter what we do with emissions of carbon dioxide in the future, this is already in the bank. Okay? But I said we have only seen a third of it. So why have we not seen the whole thing? Of course, we should never ever rule out the possibility that our models are exaggerating the effects. Okay? That's a likely possibility. But the explanation we have now is that we have not seen all of the warming because half of it is masked by these mirrors on the greenhouse blanket. So we're going to learn a little bit more about those mirrors. They are pollutants. Okay? So I talked about this 2.5 degree warming comes from the greenhouse gases. Okay, there are gases, there are particles. And the area under the pie shows how much they are contributing to that forcing. So we have trapped, remember I said, think of the greenhouse gases as a blanket. And that blanket has, thickening the blanket, has absorbed 3 watts heating. Out of the 3 watts, the CO2 contributes about 1.65, or say round it out. So CO2 is 55% of the 3 watts, and the other 45% comes from methane. What I call methane, how does methane get out of methane has been increasing. Why? Leakage from gas pipes, mainly in the Siberian region, and the other is from waste. Remember, methane comes from organic decay. So not disposing of the waste properly, we can capture it, we are not capturing it. Agriculture, rice paddies, okay, and cattle population. It's about 25% of the methane. That's what gives rise to some of the activists who say if we all become vegetarians, we can help the global warming. Okay? And nitrous oxide comes from fertilizers. Ozone is an irritant, an air pollutant. Remember, you have smog, but that ozone is also a powerful greenhouse gas. Okay? So that is about 45, this is 55, but the world is focusing mainly on this 55% for a very good reason. The lifetime of carbon dioxide is 100 to 1,000 years, and we are adding 40 billion tons every year. Okay? Without controlling that, there's no hope of mitigating climate change. But these guys can little bit help the desperate state we are in, and I'm going to talk about that. Right? And then comes black carbon. Black carbon is not a gas, it's a particle. I gave you the metaphor, think of it as a smoke in the blanket, trapping sunlight before it hits the ground. And the science professor from TERI who introduced me, she has done a lot of work on what it does, the dimming of sunlight at the surface. Okay? So we're going to talk about all these three. And first, I want to talk to you about which direction are we heading. I won't keep you guessing. We are heading in the wrong direction on all four of them. Okay, I'll talk to you about that. So, Dr. Kamna, did that address the issues which came up in the questions, or something I didn't address?
Actually, they want that what is the portion of the radiative forcing coming from natural phenomena, and what is the portion of forcing which is coming from anthropogenic phenomena?
Oh, the radiative forcing by definition is only anthropogenic. You have to understand, people keep bringing up, oh, natural factors are causing climate change. Natural things are not changing. We are talking about the change. Natural variability contributes to variation, things like water vapor, this, but that radiative forcing is only anthropogenic. Thank you for asking that. I should have made that clear. So that 3 watts is all coming from human activities. Out of that 3 watts, 55% is from fossil fuel and deforestation. The remaining 45% is all other human activities. Black carbon comes from incomplete combustion. I'll talk to you about the source. So why have we not seen the 2.5 degree warming? We have only seen 0.8 degrees, but we have only seen 25% of this. Why? We all know if you try to boil water, the more massive you take, it takes longer because of the inertia, right? An ocean has a huge inertia. You know that. If you jump into the ocean in the summer or winter, the temperature is not that different. Whereas land temperatures change from summer to winter by 30, 40, 50 degrees. The ocean temperature is hardly 5 to 10 degrees because ocean has inertia. So that has been measured in detail by sending instruments up to about 1,000 meter depth. My institution does many of that. And they have found that there are about half a degree stored in the oceans. That doesn't mean it's lost. In a matter of 10, 20, 30 years, it will cough up that half a degree. So we will see that half a degree. Okay? Still then, we are still left with 1.3 of this 2.5. And that is what IPC says is the masking. So where are those mirrors coming from? Sulfates. Sulfur dioxide is emitted by coal combustion, huge source. Organics, burning biomass from volatile organics from fossil fuel, and nitrates, transportation, NOx. They all go into the atmosphere, oxidize, and then become acids, acidic particles, or sulfate, aerosol particles. And they scatter light like mirrors. So the other thing, so that's how we explain that 2.5 is coming. Don't think we have escaped it. It's coming. So I want to tell you how soon is it coming. Okay? Next is, what is the uncertainty in our climate forecast? I have not talked about that. I said we don't know how the clouds are going to change. So when I say 2 degree warming, I'm just talking about the central range. You see, it could be as low as 1.5, or it could be as high as 5, 6 degrees. So we think the highest probability is here, but I honestly can't discount any of these. So that's why I tell those who say, oh, you're so uncertain, we don't have to take any action. Uncertainty can go both ways. This is what we call probability distribution function. So there is a finite probability it could be smaller than 2 degrees. If it happens and I tell you clean up the air, what is the effect? You're going to say I cleaned up the air and breathing clean air for nothing? No, it's something you have to do in any case. So on the other hand, if we go along with the skeptics, oh yeah, I think they know something better than us and don't do anything, and we happen to be here, just think of the consequences. Okay? So that's the issue. It's simple issue of risk management. if I tell you the plane you're going to take has a 5% probability of coming down, I want to show of hands how many of you would get on that plane. I have a 50% probability that it's going to warm by 2.5 degrees. And it's not a, sort of I pulled this question 2 days ago. I was in a flight from Varanasi to Delhi. There was a big hailstorm. And our flight almost touched the ground, and he decided to abort landing, take off. So it had gone to about 300-400 meters, and he couldn't get altitude for 5-10 minutes. So came too close to home. So what are the implications of the uncertainty? This is something I put together. I don't know if any international colleagues agree on this, that if you have a 2-degree warming, what are some of the major icons of climate change which will fall down one by one? Okay? The Arctic summer ice, at 2-degree warming, likely disappear. Then comes the Himalayan Tibetan glaciers, because there are many, many, many small glaciers, about 80% are melting. By the time you reach 3 degrees, then you talk about Greenland ice sheet, so on and so forth. Okay? But these are all, I would say, intelligent guess. Like I said, remember I said we don't have an analog of a planet warmer than present by 2 degrees, because we are already in an interglacial. So let's talk about how we as society are responding to this. Remember, this science, the first definitive paper on CO2 was published 105 years ago by Svante Arrhenius, the so-called father of physical chemistry. Okay? Oh, sorry. So carbon dioxide emissions is shown this and that. So that's for energy consumption, and that's other processes, cement manufacture, etc. And the green one is land use, clearing forests. And the others, they have added, I don't know why, methane and nitrous oxide. They didn't add other things, the F gases. What you see is that we were equivalent to about 28 gigatons since 1970-71. In 1980s, when I published my paper saying this warming is serious, we will see it by year 2000. It's clear no one paid any attention to what I was saying, so the emission increased. Now we are at 50. So this 40 billion ton gorilla is still growing. So by and large, society has ignored this danger. Okay? So the next thing, so CO2 and the other greenhouse gases, they're still growing. Okay? The second is the mask. Remember I said the sulfate cooling. So basically, the sulfate aerosols come from sulfur dioxide emissions from coal combustion. Okay? So when you burn coal, the sulfur in the coal goes into sulfur dioxide, it oxidizes, and it gets cooked in sulfur dioxide either into sulfuric acid and falls up acid rain, or becomes sulfate particles, ammonium sulfate. And when they're in the particle phase, they scatter sunlight, and that's why you see haze. Okay? So, but that sulfur dioxide emissions from the US and North America are decreasing. Sorry. Why is North America and Europe cutting down their sulfur dioxide emissions? Simply because they cause acid rain. They are also a major source of PM, particulate, which has been shown kills over 6 million every year. Okay? So because of concerns about that, they are coming down rapidly. So the mask, which was this big, is shrinking. What does that mean? The global warming is going to accelerate, right? Because at 2.5 degrees, half of that has been masked. We are just unmasking it. In fact, many suggest that's why Europe is warming much more rapidly, because they're cleaning up their air. So there's a price to pay for cleaning up. But again, there's no question we have to cut down SO2 emissions. Human health is personally I would think a lot more important than the climate issues I'm talking about. So we are going the wrong way. Warming greenhouses are increasing, so the blanket is thickening. And the cooling aerosols are decreasing. And then the smoke in the blanket, the black carbon is increasing emissions. So all three, the compass is not pointed in the right direction in any of these three. Okay? So let me just take you back here and tell you what I'm talking about. This pie is increasing. In this case, in this pie, the methane is increasing, one of the halocarbon is increasing, nitrous oxide, we don't know, ozone is increasing because the pollution is increasing. Black carbon is also increasing, okay? And this is shrinking. So you know what I mean by all three are wrong directions. So now I go to a little bit to the modeling world. This is a model my graduate student Yang Zhu and I put together. So this is the simulation of the temperature from 1900 to 2000. This is the observed records. Okay? There was a question in the second lecture about stochastic variation in the climate system, and that is that. So that's a natural system. And the change we are seeing is much, much more than the variability in the system. Okay? So if we go on business as usual, this is where we are. We will hit 2 degrees by 2050. I call that near term, and we go to 4 degrees by end of this century. 4 degrees, World Bank released a report considering this would be a catastrophe. Okay? But these are all subjective words. So let's talk about what we need to do. So basically, my colleague David Victor and I, who have written many papers on the topic of mitigation, he calls it global warming gridlock. It's a big book. Why we are stuck? He's a political scientist from Stanford and then just UCSD. We have written some papers in Foreign Affairs together, written op-ed in New York Times. He walks you through step by step why we are in this deadlock. It's a very interesting book to read. But the bottom line is 160 nations have to sign on a piece of paper before we can start some action. Just imagine, I see students here, scientists, about 6 of you getting together and agree on something, right? But here, national interests are involved. How are we ever going to sign and say, okay, I'll stop doing this, although it's going to hurt my economy, I will lose my election, I'm going to do this, which is not going to happen. Unless the changes become so large, it threatens our very existence. That's about 30 to 50 years down the road. If we wait that long, at 45 billion tons, you can imagine how many, they're all accumulating, okay? So the Copenhagen Accord, which was signed by India's Prime Minister and US President Obama, that we will do everything to avoid temperature reaching above 2 degrees. The question you should ask is, wait a minute, but you already told us the warming, no matter what we do, will exceed 2.5 degrees. So this is where I developed a new strategy with my students. How to make this happen? At least delay the 2 degrees, okay? So that's the paper which came out in 2010. Oh, this is a little bit outdated. It should be published in 2010. What I was shooting for is that let the nations work on this. It's important. But in the meantime, can we reduce these substances whose lifetime is a lot less? See, black carbon lifetime is 1 week. So if we take action to cut it down, they're gone 2 weeks from now. So that smoke is gone. Okay, that's how quick. Ozone, within a month. Methane will take 10 years, but still fine. Okay? So these are what's called short-lived substances. So to talk about the CO2, what we need to do to the CO2, so this is the emission in gigatons per year. So that's here. That's the path we are on. We are now right on the peak. And now there is a push, and it has not been ratified yet, to cut it down by 50%. But you can see, even if we start, that's 2015. It's not going to happen in 2 years, but even if it does, even if it comes down, the CO2 is still growing because of the inertia. So we are right now at 400, we'll go to 450, 445, and then if we cut it to zero, almost zero, then it will stabilize. In the meantime, you have added another 1 degree of warming. You've gone from 2.5 to 3.5. Okay? So the CO2 reduction, while it is absolutely, absolutely critical, otherwise the warming you're talking about next century is 6 degrees, 8 degrees. Okay? But it's not going to prevent this imminent 2-degree warming we are facing. And just to tell you what's happening in terms of the argument between nations, this is between US and China, it's put together by Lawrence Livermore Lab. See, the annual emissions by US is here, and this is China. But I told you the global warming is not caused by today's emission, cumulative emissions. So if you look at to this 2.5 degree warming, then you see that from the US, over the last 100 years, we have put so much. China is only here. So the current global warming and the 2.5 global warming, you can't blame it on China. India is so small, I couldn't even show it here. Okay, I don't understand why India can't use graphs like this to say, wait a minute, why are you waiting for us to cut down? So the science is not translating to policymakers, or they're not able to make this argument. But if you look at the per capita emission again, US is super high, even with this. So the question is, how do we negotiate on total emissions, on the current year's emissions, or cumulative emissions, or per capita emission? This is kind of moral, ethical, political argument which is going on. So the blue line is what we stop at just CO2 mitigation. See, CO2 mitigation will really bring down the warming end of the century, almost a degree. But 2050, it doesn't do much. So it can't stop the near-term disaster we are facing in our lifetime. Okay? You need another strategy. So that strategy is, so I put it all together, reduce the rate of thickening of the blanket, CO2 levels to peak below 440 ppm. I agree with that. I mean, it'll be suicidal if you let the CO2 exceed beyond that. Who will benefit? Grandchildren, not your grandchildren, mine. Okay? This will benefit you. In your lifetime, you'll see this. And then what we need to do, we are unmasking. By heaven's sake, when you unmask, also remove the black carbon and ozone. Okay? That will compensate for this unmasking. The reason somehow my work has been misunderstood, and Ramanathan is asking us to cut down black carbon to point the finger at the developing nations. See, to me, I have 1 foot in India and 1 foot in America. To me, it's not an issue of developed or developing nations. How are we going to prevent our people from facing disaster? Okay? And the last one is thin that blanket. See, the only way you can thin the blanket is not cutting by CO2, I already showed you that, cutting down short-lived gases, because they will go down. You cut down ozone warming pollutants, they're gone 2 months from now. So the blanket is shrinking. Remember, we are committed 2.5. The only way we can cut it down is shrink that blanket. And the only way you can shrink that blanket is cut down the emissions of short-lived gases. HFCs, methane, ozone. But again, if you just did that and not cut CO2, that would be idiotic. Okay, we have saved ourselves for 20, 30 years, but we ended up hurting our grandchildren much more worse. So we need to do both. That's the problem which is being discussed. So I already discussed that. What are the short-lived pollutants? So, So that is, if you cut down both CO2 and the short-lived pollutants, that's 2 degrees, this is 1.5. So you don't hit the 2 degrees till the end of this century. So you just sort of pushed it by 30, 40 years, okay? So this curve shows that point. That is business as usual, and that's the path we are on, okay? And if we miraculously succeed to start cutting down CO2, we'll be on this path. If we just did short-lived climate pollutants, that will be that. You'll still reach 3 degrees. If you do both, then we have a greater than 50% chance of avoiding the 2-degree warming. We'll be just skirting it, okay? So this shows in terms of probability distribution. I'm not going to walk you through this. All I'll tell you is that right now, there is a 95% probability of exceeding 2-degree warming by 2050. If you do the short-lived mitigation, if you do CO2, it reduces that. And if you do short-lived pollutants, the probability of exceeding 2 degrees is 5%. Okay? So we have given ourselves some time to deal with this. So how did I take all this from science to policy making? So the first is I realized we have to regionalize the problem. Okay? The black carbon is a fantastic example. It's an air pollutant. I'll show you why it's regionalized. Then assess the local and regional impacts of air pollution. Again, taking the black carbon example, the 2 dominant sources of black carbon are diesel and cooking, lighting, and heating. Okay, those are the 2 major sources. So I teamed up with scientists from India, China, Korea, and Japan, and Sweden, and Germany, and the US, and we released this report, Atmospheric Brown Clouds. It was released in 2008 with China. The Chinese government participated in this. Then the Vatican asked me and Nobel laureate Crutzen, a close friend of mine, and a Swede, to organize Fate of Mountain Glaciers. Okay, so Indian glaciologists participated in that. We talked about the Alps and the Himalayas. What threats are they facing? Finally, the United Nations got hint of it. They made an assessment of this whole black carbon tropospheric ozone, and I was the vice chair. Schindel is from NASA. It was released in 2011. They basically confirmed these reports. What I was suggesting, we can keep it under 2. But in addition, they said, what are the co-benefits? Okay, this is the climate cooling. And we concluded we can save as much as 2.5 million lives lost to black carbon pollution. And we can save about 50 to 100 million tons of crops lost each year. Okay? Because of ozone pollution, dimming from black carbon, and global warming. Don't forget, warming in the tropical regions reduces the yield. Okay? So, about several governments, it was initiated by Hillary Clinton, started this Climate and Clean Air Coalition. But 25 nations have joined, the European World Bank, so this is now getting attention. But it's not still an agreement, it's just cooperative partnership. So let me move on. So then I want to conclude with the project I'm doing with TERI on cook stoves, okay? Started because I realized there's no use just talking about this, you got to do it in the field. See, the key thing to do the short-lived climate pollutants, since its effects are local, we don't need 160 nations to sign off. Okay? This can be done at the grassroots level. And then, of course, we need NGOs. We need the rich folks to put their money into this, the private foundations. So I thought we need to show how to do this. So we started to see the 2 dominant sources of black carbon in South Asia are diesel and residential biomass, cooking with firewood, cow dung, and this. And again, this shows the sources of black carbon, tailpipes, brick kilns, cooking, and biomass burning, open burning. That's about 60% of this can be controlled. So this shows, we are doing this project in Mukteshwar, and it shows, I can't see it very clearly here. Basically, I was inside this woman's house in the village, and I told her about the smoke. She said, I'm not sure, I don't think there is smoke. And then I took her outside and showed what was happening, okay? And then that smoke, imagine there are 600,000 villages, and each village is about 100 homes. You just do the arithmetic, okay? Becomes this vast plume. So I got together with he's a famous chemical modeler of aerosols. Probably has one of the best models. I teamed up, this was a simulation of black carbon over the Indo-Chinese region. And you can see China's is about much worse. I told him, Greg, just remove cooking. Just cooking. And India went from this to this. It is sort of hard to believe, when you go, you see this big pollution in cities, you think it's all the cars. They are. I'm not claiming they're not contributing. But residential biomass combustion, when you think about this is happening around the world. We have left behind about 3 billion in the world with no access to fossil fuels. Okay? And you can't blame them. So they have to survive. So they get hold of whatever they can get. So I think of this same thing in the US. We burning CO2, knowing it's going to warm. It is just the society doesn't seem to care. So we started this project Surya. Mr. Rahman is the division director of social intervention at TERI. It's myself, and this name is not coincident. That's my daughter. She's a wireless technology expert. So she's trying to revolutionize data collection using cell phones. I'll show you some example of that. Oh, can we have this movie coming out? This was a movie produced by TERI of this project. Can we have the sound also coming out? I'm just going to show about 2 minutes of this. It's about 8 minutes long. I think you can get it from the TERI website. If it doesn't come from that, you can just show it from oh, I have to do something? Oh. Sorry? You can run it independently. That may be the better option. Yeah. Yeah. The sound. Sound is not coming. Oh. That was not how we taped it. There's a nice music because this was during Ramzan time. Okay, maybe we can. What? Sure. It basically just shows how we did this project and collecting. Let's go back to the. slide 37. You can go back to that. Right. No, sorry. Oh, you're doing this. Yeah, I think if you click that hand, oh no. All right. I already talked about health impact. This is a WHO study which was released, and it sort of listed about 67 risk factors. What they concluded was household air pollution. That's from cooking and heating. Solid fuels account for 3.5 million deaths. And then when it escapes, the ambient, another 3.2 million. So what we did was, did a careful baseline monitoring of it. This project was done in Uttar Pradesh. We did the ambient black carbon, we tested it, the cook stoves, and TERI tried to disseminate it. So we finished all the way from mud stove to this improved cook stove and documented its effects. So let me just quickly walk you through the result. This is the black carbon. This was done in the Jagdishpur district. It was, off of Lucknow, about 2 hours. And this is the black carbon concentration. Okay. Mind you, if you were to make these measurements about 20 kilometers away from Delhi, where there are no villages, it will be around 1 to 2, maximum 5. So this is the concentration outside the home. And you can see how it picks up. 6 o'clock, she starts cooking. The black carbon concentration goes up. She finishes her cooking around 7:30, sends the children to school and goes to the field, and there's no emission, goes down, and then comes back at 5:30. It was just like a clock. Okay? And TERI has developed this so-called forced draft stove. So we made measurements. These are all, the cell phones played a major role because we wanted to measure this on mass scale, hundreds of homes, thousands of homes. But we're not there yet. But you saw this black carbon emission from mud stove, and by the time you use the forced draft stove, it comes on by 60 to 70%. The beauty of this is she still can use her firewood. We're not asking her to pay. Okay? And the pollution comes down. It's not that simple. There are behavioral changes are involved. We are not there yet. At least we know which technology works. Now the question is, Caleb, where are we stuck? Our stoves cost 60 to about 3,000 rupees. For somebody who's making, right, about 100 rupees a day, that's a full month's salary. Would you buy a cook stove if it costs your monthly paycheck? We won't. That's the reason we don't put solar. It's about 6 weeks of our pay. So we're thinking, how do you do it sustainably? And what we have now done is carbon credit to see if we can get carbon credit. So to use, we're combining both the cook stoves and the solar lighting. We have chosen 1,000 homes. That was why I'm here. We have identity of bank, which will give her the loan to buy the stove. And we'll collect the data of the stove usage using cell phones. So each of them will have a monitor. So I would know how long she's using it. And we know if she uses it for 1 hour, she cuts down her CO2 emissions by so much. She cuts down her black carbon emissions so much. She cuts down her ozone and methane emissions. So the data will go from the village to Nitya, my daughter's lab. She'll convert it into these hours for me. My lab, my spoon, crank out the carbon credit. And we have opened a climate mitigation fund. And just donations, okay? And we have about $45,000, which will serve about 1,000. So the women will get, in 2 years, 80% of the cost of the stuff. Carbon credit itself is not a new idea. The new idea here are two. The user or the woman gets the money directly through the bank every month. The carbon credits normally go to corporations. So when you buy, say, a fuel-saving car, you don't get that benefit. Then more of us would do that. Okay? So we are testing that. And 2 major voluntary carbon credit have signed on with us. They are watching. If what we claim happens, that we can document it, get them paid to them, then the Surya project would go global. I'm hoping it go viral. We'll be listed. So we can take care of millions of women buying these and the rest of us paying for it through carbon credit. And if you can ask why should we pay for it, I'll give you these two reasons. First, of course, public health improves. The second is, by doing so, she's doing a little bit to mitigate climate change. She is doing a little bit to mitigate glacier melt and the monsoon. So while the rest of us have failed, it'll be ironic if village women are leading the fight against climate change, both for their self-interest and their common good interest. So that's what I wanted to conclude, that we don't have to wait for governments to solve this. They will solve the problem, but I think we can give them help by taking bottom-up, ground-level actions. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that my feeling is we need to adapt to at least 2-degree warming. But we don't know what to adapt for, okay? So we need to, for South Asia, the major issues in my mind are monsoon variability. 60% of the economy runs on the monsoon. Intensity distribution, I told you about how high intensity rainfall is increasing and the length of the monsoon, that's changing. The Himalayan Tibetan glacier system, sea level, storm surges, and coastal flooding. So these are, I think we need urgently for each nation or each region such studies. And we still have, fortunately, about 35 years. Just to give you one idea, Venice, as you know, is in the water, and to protect them from this, they built, barriers. Just in a small island, it's not island, small country is $170 billion. Just imagine protecting something like Bangladesh or a coastal region, what it would take. So adaptation may be the option we have, okay? So that planning has to start. Thank you. I want to give a big thanks to TERI University and Dr. Kamna Sachdeva for making this happen.